Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, a crowd-driven, crowd-supported feature where we answer your questions on history, on political philosophy, on current events, on culture, on geopolitics, all those things that matter to us as citizens. And today's question comes from Bradley, and it's this. How can we use the law to force the federal and our provincial governments to review any falsified data that help to set the agenda on dealing with anthropogenic global warming, that is man-made climate change, including, of course, the imposition of carbon taxes? I think it's an excellent question. I think it's a very important debate. I think there is too much dubious data in it. And if anybody doubts my commitment to straightening out our thinking on the whole issue of climate change, please watch The Environment: A True Story, my documentary on that subject. But that said, the answer to the question is there is no way to use the law to do this. And in fact, that's a good thing. I mean, obviously there are laws in this country against fraud. There are duties of due diligence and care on people in the public sector to make sure that what they're doing is not based on completely mangled data, on idiocy, on deliberate lies, that kind of thing. And there's some strange stuff out there in the debate on global warming. But what we have here is fundamentally a policy debate about interpretations of science, about the meaning of evidence. And although I share your frustration, Bradley, I have to say I think there's been too much criminalization of policy differences in areas like hate speech, attempting to shut down views we don't want to hear. In the United States, you've seen a lot of this on both sides, and I think it's uncomfortable. It's important to have a sound constitutional order. It's important to have fundamental rights guaranteed. It's important to have a judicial branch that can strike down unconstitutional laws or unconstitutional actions by the executive. But it's also important to grasp that there is a lot that reasonable people can disagree about. Lately, I'm not sure we've been as good at that as we ought to be. There's far too much tendency to assume that if somebody opposes you, they must be either an idiot, a liar, or both. Not saying there aren't fools and rogues out there, but even once they've been weeded out of the debate, people of goodwill, intelligence, and due intellectual diligence can disagree about things. So what we need to make sure that we do on global warming, as anywhere else, is instead of trying to shut down debate, throwing dirty names at people, including deniers, we need to talk reasonably. Okay, what do we think is happening? What is the evidence? How good is the evidence? How confident are we in this evidence? What evidence might you want to put before me that I haven't considered that might cause me to revisit my certainty at least about this? What are the policy implications if we accept the interpretation of the evidence? How far can we go? How far do we need to go? To talk about the fact, and again, I'll refer you to my documentary, that there is an enormous body of evidence out there, and it's not controversial stuff. There is an enormous body of well-accepted data that shows that carbon dioxide has not been driving global temperature in the last 1,000 years, in the last 200 years, in the last 10 million years, in the last 500 billion years. It's a very odd claim that it suddenly started doing so around 1970. There's a lot to discuss and debate here, but I really think we need to discuss it in the laboratory, in the classroom, in the newspaper, at the coffee shop, in the public square, not in the courtroom. Yeah, I'm really frustrated by bad data, and there do seem to be cases where people have their thumb on the scale. But exposing them and shaming them ought to be enough. And you know what? If we're not winning this argument hands down, well, that happens a lot. It's amazing the number of public policy debates. You'd think, oh, for goodness sakes, you can't possibly accept that old error, or good heavens, you can't have found a new way to be wrong. And yet people have. And you're staring at them in horror and disbelief, and you know what? They're staring right back at you with the same look on their faces. So yeah, we need to clear the air, so to speak, on climate change. We need to understand the power of natural processes and the irrelevance of human action. We need to expose the oversimplification, sometimes willful oversimplification, the dubious ways in which data is sometimes collected. We need to expose all this stuff to sunlight, right? The Dracula effect that I talked about in the previous video about free speech, the principle that sunlight destroys evil. It is good enough. We must expose those who try to silence their adversaries and cut off debate as bullies. We must refuse to be intimidated, and we must have confidence that the truth will prevail. So, can we expose the nonsense, the error, even the deceit? Absolutely, but not through the law, simply by courageous and persistent speaking of the truth. If you're enjoying this feature, and you'd like to pose your own question, because we do depend on you for questions. We never seed them. Every question that we get is one that a viewer has submitted. This URL will tell you how to do it. But also please remember that Ask the Professor, like everything I do, is crowdfunded. I'm dependent on you for support. So if you want the feature to continue, please click this button, go to my website, make a contribution to help sustain Ask the Professor, the documentaries, the books, the writing, everything that I do, in the belief that truth will ultimately prevail. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.